Hey everyone, let's break down one of the most important aspects of public speaking and performance: vocal delivery. The way you say something and use your voice completely changes how your audience hears and feels your message. So today we're going to explore 5 of the key elements of vocal delivery. You'll see them here: clarity, volume, pacing, tone, and pauses. We'll look at what each of these means, common mistakes to avoid, and how to use each one of them to become a more dynamic and compelling public speaker. Let's jump in and get started. We can start with clarity. Clarity is all about having strong articulation and enunciation. Articulation is how clearly you shape your words, whereas enunciation is about how precisely you pronounce them. And together they make sure that your audience actually understands what you're saying. Super important. When you don't articulate well, your words can sound slurred or mumbled. You might drop consonants, you might blend syllables together, or you might speak in a way that just feels too casual for the setting. And that can make your message sound really hard to follow, even if your content is strong. So here's a great tip to improve delivery. Think about over-exaggerating your mouth movements when practicing. So you read a sentence slowly and make sure each syllable is crisp and clear. Obviously, you would never do that in a real speech, but getting in the practice of that and building that muscle memory will make you a stronger speaker in terms of articulation and enunciation. And doing that with tongue twisters especially is a great way to sharpen your articulation and warm up your voice. I always recommend to all of my students that they warm up by doing tongue twisters at a very loud volume before a competition. That'll just help you. Let's move to the second one, which is volume. Volume is obviously the loudness or softness of your voice, and it matters for 2 reasons. The first is exceedingly obvious. Your audience just needs to hear you. Confident speakers have strong projection. Their voice should be able to fill the room without feeling like they're shouting. And there's a fine line there, and we'll talk about that in a moment. The second reason volume is so important is you can use changes in volume to create emphasis and emotional impact. So if you raise your voice slightly, that expresses urgency or passion. And if you lower your voice, you can draw the audience in for something more intimate, thoughtful, or intense. So imagine I'm saying the sentence, "I have something important to say." Obviously, I did that very loudly. It creates a sense of urgency. I'll say the same sentence now, but I'll lower my voice. "I have something important to say." Obviously, that felt very different. Now, just like in music, dynamics, changing the volume, it really, really matters. There are 2 common issues I see when it comes to volume. The first is people just aren't projecting enough, so it's hard to hear you and you aren't projecting confidence. And second, you stay at the same volume for nearly the entirety of the speech. Like I've said, you gotta vary your volume, or else it becomes really easy to tune you out. And here's another really important tip, especially if you're struggling with projection. I get a lot of students who feel like they can't make their voice loud. And I promise you, it's not a biological issue. Everybody has the ability to get their voice to a louder level. And it doesn't mean shouting. It means speaking from your diaphragm. What does that mean? It means you're speaking from a deeper, almost from your stomach as opposed to your throat. And that means using your breath to support your voice instead of straining your neck or tightening your vocal cords. So here's how you can do it. Put your hand on your belly. Take a really deep breath so that your stomach expands all of the way. You should really feel your stomach expanding. And then speak while keeping that breath steady and strong. So you should be able to feel your voice all the way in your stomach with that breath steady and strong, belly expanded. And if you can feel your shoulders lifting or throat tightening, you're not using your breath correctly. So practice by saying that sentence, "I have something important to say," while keeping your belly engaged and your throat relaxed. And that's how you build a strong, healthy voice that fills the room without shouting. And here's another pro move. You should lower your volume intentionally right before a big moment. It makes the audience lean in, and then you can hit them with something powerful. Third is pacing. Pacing is how quickly or slowly you are speaking. When you're nervous, it's really easy to start speeding up and rushing through your speech. But on the other hand, speaking too slowly without purpose can lose your audience's interest. And so the key is to vary your pacing to match the message. A faster rate typically shows excitement, energy, or a flood of ideas. And a slower rate is perfect for clarity, emphasis, or letting something sink in. So here's a tip. When you're about to say something really important, slow down. It signals, hey, pay attention to this. And then you can go a little bit quicker when you're establishing more informative facts. And remember, your rate needs to give your audience time to process. This is one of the biggest mistakes I see students make. If you're explaining something complex, pacing matters just as much as the words themselves. You have to slow down and give your audience time to process the information. Fourth is tone. That's the pitch of your voice, which is the highness or the lowness of your voice. So this isn't about volume. If you think about it like musical notes, it's about how high do you go versus how low does your voice go. That highness or lowness is tone or pitch. And it makes your voice expressive. It's how you can show tone, mood, or emotion. Speaking in a monotone where the pitch just never changes is one of the fastest ways to lose your audience, even if your ideas are great. Rising pitch suggests excitement, curiosity, or questioning, and lowering your pitch grounds your speech and gives it a sense of strength or calm authority. Another big issue I see isn't necessarily that a student is monotone, but that they use one tonal pattern for every single sentence. They never vary it. And when that happens, it becomes pretty easy to tune you out. It doesn't matter what the vocal component is. Hopefully you all are noticing the pattern. One of the biggest sins you can commit is not having variation, whether it's speed, whether it's tone, whether it's volume. Any one of those without any variation for the entire speech causes the audience to get bored. So here's something you can do for tone. Practice reading a simple sentence like, I didn't say he stole the money, and change the pitch emphasis on each word. And you'll be amazed by how much the meaning changes from just the pitch. I'll do 2 of them, but you should do it for all of them just to get the feeling of it. If I say, I didn't say he stole the money, very different than if I say, I didn't say he stole the money. Very different than if I say, I didn't say he stole the money. Hopefully you get the point. And that's just for a specific word, but this occurs across sentences as well. If I say, I didn't say he stole the money, that's very different than if I say, I didn't say he stole the money. Tonal variation helps you sound more human, more alive, and more connected to your message. It's really, really important. And finally, pauses. Pauses are low-key the unsung hero of vocal delivery, and one of the things that novices massacre more than any of the others. A pause is just so powerful. It gives your audience time to absorb what you just said, it builds suspense, it signals a shift, and it lets you breathe. When you're speaking, don't be afraid of silence. I see this a lot with novices. They're afraid of pausing because they think the audience will think that they are messing up and forgetting their speech. But a well-timed pause really doesn't feel like that. It actually looks like you're in control, and it makes your words hit way harder than anything else. So some common mistakes I see novices make. First, not pausing at the end of sentences. You have to give your audience time to process what you just said, and if you speed to the next sentence with no pause, the audience doesn't get that. And I think that's especially true at the end of paragraphs. Paragraphs should get an extra huge long pause, and I rarely see students do that successfully. Second is pausing in weird places, like the middle of sentences. I oftentimes see especially speech and debaters develop a weird broadcaster voice where they start putting pauses in the middle of clauses, which makes no sense. They'll say something like this. They'll say, I went to the store. I bought an apple. And I don't know why they speak like that, where they start pausing in weird ways that they never would in conversation. And what I immediately do every time, I say, stop, sit down, turn to your friend, and just say those sentences like you would if you were at lunch. And then the weird pauses go away immediately. And that type of awkward pausing just makes you feel disingenuous. It makes you feel less authentic. It makes you feel less human. So you should pause at punctuation marks, like commas briefly and periods. I know that sounds really obvious, but students are messing that up. And you want your delivery to sound composed, yes, but really you want it to sound natural. So we should say, I went to the store. I bought an apple. That sounds way more normal than I went to the store, etc. Here's another tip. Oftentimes, students, when they're speaking and getting used to fluency, they put in a lot of filler words. And you're doing it because you're uncomfortable with having to speak in front of other people. And that's a way to signal that you're thinking about what's going on and you're struggling. But as soon as you start saying or like, whatever your filler word is, it just absolutely plummets how much I perceive you as being a competent and confident speaker. So you should get rid of all those filler words. And whenever you need to take a second to think about the next words that you're going to say, just take a pause. It's okay to stop and collect your thoughts. And it often makes you sound way more polished and composed. Trust, 2 seconds of you pausing and thinking about what you're saying, as long as you continue to look forward confidently, the audience probably won't even realize that you had a fluency error. So you should think of pauses like punctuation in writing. They structure your speech. They give it rhythm. Let's take a look. So those are the 5 qualities that I really want us to focus on vocal delivery. Let's take a look. This was a freshman. This speaker actually has a lot of potential and is doing a lot of things really, really well. But we're going to compare this freshman, who I'm sure will be a national champion by the time he graduates, to Angad, who just won nationals this past summer. And you'll see just how different all of these components are. And what I really want you to do as you're watching these is don't just look at the overall speaker. This is a big mistake people who are trying to learn the art of public speaking make, is they just presume that some people, they got the charisma or they don't. But that's not how it is at all. All of these components are components that you can break down, you can study, you can create drills around them based on those tips that I said, you can target them, and then you can grow. So you should really think about it. Here's a rubric for vocal delivery, and I'm sure this can be improved a little bit. I always end up tinkering with them. But overall, you get the idea. It has the categories: clarity, volume, pacing, tone, pauses. And what's less important than everything within all of these particular columns is just the idea of thinking about breaking a speaker's delivery into these particular sections. So watching a speaker and thinking about, are they varying their tone well? Are they projecting well and varying their volume? Do they have an intentional pacing that is varied and enhances the message of the speech? If you start to think like that and watch speakers for those particular qualities of delivery, you'll start to internalize those messages and they'll become a lot more natural for you. So think about these 5 categories and think about what the freshman is doing versus what the most polished national champion senior does. Let's take a quick look.
And that's my concern. When we overuse specific language, as I did, we become desensitized to it. And the problem is, this is also the case with harmful language in our society today. In today's world where hate speech and hyperbole reign supreme, it's easy to forget what's harmful or not. Since according to author Christopher Hazel, we are assailed with a litany of words. And as a result, their perceived power has diminished.
So notice, I actually think this speaker is doing a lot of things well, but you can tell he's a novice. His clarity isn't as great as we'll see in a moment Angad's is. He doesn't quite have the command over projection that you'll see a more polished speaker have. If we look at all of these components, the clarity has some room for growth, like I said. Volume could be projecting more. Pacing feels a little bit slow and no variation. The tone also seems to just be hitting one note. He's not monotone, but it doesn't quite have that sense of intentionality that we'll really want. And while there are pauses, they oftentimes feel a little bit awkward. Let's compare that to Angad.
Because our prayer should be the start of our battle, not the end. And that's my concern. When tragedy strikes, we offer prayers, but fail to act upon them. We give thoughts without tenacity and wishes without will. Activist and actor Mark Ruffalo put it best. Prayers without accord and action are silent lies, told to oneself, heard by no God, amounting to nothing. So today, let's first explore how our prayers have turned empty, then how they can breed complacency, before finally living on some solutions. Because if we want real change, we need more than a Madonna chorus. We need action.
Hopefully you can just see night and day. An unpolished freshman who is very much emerging in terms of his capabilities on all of these characteristics and components that we're practicing versus a very polished senior. In general, I think this is a great drill to do. The more that you record yourself speaking and look at your delivery and then compare it to the most polished and refined speakers, the more you'll start to identify the areas you have for growth. But again, it's really important that you don't just record a video of yourself, say, oh man, I'm not very good at public speaking, and then look at a refined national champion speaker and say, wow, that person was really, really talented, and leave it there. That doesn't help you to grow. Instead, you need to break down the components. So start with one area, vocal delivery. Say, all right, these are the 5 components I got to focus on. Start to identify which of the components of vocal delivery you have room for growth in, and then target that with the drills that we were talking about. So hopefully this helped. I think today we gave a good insight into how to master the core components of vocal delivery. And I think important mindset is you don't have to be perfect right away. But becoming aware of these tools and practicing them intentionally will take your delivery from decent to powerful. So next time you speak, don't just focus on what you're saying, pay attention to how you are saying it with your voice.